Indeed, God is present here and now, as in everywhere and every when. So, in the awareness of God's presence now, let us pray. Father, Mother God, we give thanks for this opportunity to acknowledge your presence here in this moment, to accept you into our lives, and to realize that your presence is never absent, but rather it is our awareness. And so we hold our awareness of your presence now. And as we open ourselves to the blessings of God, let us also open our hearts to the family, the friends, the community of Christ Church. We see those who were there worshiping God in prayer, subjected to this horrible violence. And we see the love of God embracing them and lifting them and transforming them. We see those that were injured, both the physical and the emotional trauma that they were subjected to. And we hold them in the light, seeing them progressing towards their healing. And we see the families of all those affected. We see the love of God embracing them, transforming them, and allowing them to release the fear and anger that has arisen. And let us also hold the shooter. Hold the shooter in the light of God. Seeing the shooter transformed, seeing the hate disappear, seeing the fear disappear. We allow this love of God to spread throughout this planet, embracing each and every person on the planet, dissolving the fear that is held by each and every person, dissolving the hate that is held by each and every person, seeing the love of God permeate our society. Recognizing that we are the messengers of God's love. We step into this moment, releasing any hatred that we have, releasing any fear that we have, opening ourselves to compassion. That terrible, wonderful burden of compassion. That we may lift the downtrodden, that we may encourage those who are disappointed, that we may allow ourselves to be the expressions of God in this moment. And for this awareness and for this opportunity to be this expression and conduit of God's love, we give thanks. And so it is that together we say, Amen. Boy. So, with that, happy St. Patrick's Day. We've been talking over the course of the last, multiple weeks, we've been talking about this one great commandment of love God and love your neighbor. Love God with all your heart and with all your soul, all your strength. Love God with every aspect of your awareness and love your neighbor as yourself. And those are not two commandments, they are one commandment, because loving God with all your heart is loving all of creation, and all of our neighbors are members of that creation, are expressions of that one God. And so loving God with all our hearts is also loving our neighbors as ourselves. Well, St. Patrick. St. Patrick was born in the latter part of the 4th century. Some say 370, some say 373, some say 390. It's hard to tell because, frankly, calendars were not a big deal at that point in time, particularly for the shepherds that were out on the hills minding the sheep. His father was an officer in the British detachment of the Roman army. He was also a deacon in the church. But Patrick was not one to follow the strictures of religion. He didn't want to have anything to do with it because, I suppose, because his dad was involved in it. But when he was 16, he was out tending the sheep, and some Irish pirates came along, captured him along with a number of others, loaded him on a ship, took him back to Ireland, sold him into slavery. And so Patrick was imprisoned and also a sheep herder. He was carefully controlled in his movements, but over the course of those 6 years, he considered the fact that he was captured and sold into slavery as God's condemnation of his rejection of the teaching that his father was offering as a deacon of the church. So he saw his enslavement as retribution, punishment. So over the course of the 6-year period, he began to realize that if he was going to gain God's favor, he needed to embrace those teachings that were offered. And lo and behold, he was able to escape, get back to England. And so he decided to go into the ministry, into priesthood. And he spent a dozen years or so in France at a monastery studying the words, and became ordained, as it were. In the 4th century, that wasn't really a big thing, but he took on the mantle of priesthood, went back to England, and he was called back to Ireland. He said he heard the call of the Irish people inviting him to come back and to share his understanding of God with them. So he went back to Ireland, and over the course of 20 years, he traveled the length and breadth of Ireland, preaching, setting up churches, evangelizing. And he died when he was, well, it would have been either 50 or 90, in that range, depending upon when he was born. But in 461, supposedly on March the 17th, 461, he died. And he has been honored in Ireland as being Ireland's favorite son, because he brought the Word of God to Ireland. In fact, he was not the first evangelist in Ireland. There were a number of people before him. And so it would be hard to say that he was the one that brought Christianity, but certainly he was the passionate, active evangelist that brought Irish people Christianity as it was being taught then. So St. Patrick's Day is revered in Ireland. Not the least reason, I'm sure, is that it has alcohol and the consumption of that as part of the tradition. St. Patrick did not banish snakes from Ireland. Anybody still suffering under that illusion? It turns out that there have been no fossils of snakes found in the fossil record since the last Great Ice Age. But St. Patrick did use the shamrock as a teaching tool. He taught the Trinity through the three-leaf shamrock. So there are some parts of that legend that are real, some parts not. But happy St. Patrick's Day. Not Irish, but I understand the tradition, being so steeped in alcohol as it is. O'Shaughnessy would go into the bar every Friday night, and he would order up 3 shots of whiskey. He would set them in front of him. And in a ritualistic fashion, he would take 1 shot, lift it, and drink it. Set it down. A few minutes later, pick up the second, drink it, set it down. And the third. And every Friday night he would do this. And finally the bartender just couldn't hold his curiosity any longer. He says, "Why do you do that?" He said, and O'Shaughnessy said, "Well, I've got me brother in Boston and I've got me brother in Melbourne, and every Friday night at this hour, in Boston in the afternoon and in Australia late at night, right now we are lifting our 3 shots, honoring each other." Well, this continued on for a number of weeks, and one Friday night, Shaughnessy came in and he ordered 2 shots of whiskey, set them down before him. Lifted one, long pause, sat down the other one. Bartender came over and he says, "Oh, O'Shaughnessy, I'm so sorry." O'Shaughnessy said, "What?" He said, "Well, I noticed that you only have 2 shots. I'm assuming that one of your brothers died." He says, "Oh, no, it's my doctor. My doctor has told me that I shouldn't drink anymore." So, where was your Patrick? I know, you're going to point back there. He's back there. Well, Patrick was a very passionate fellow. And when I say, where is your Patrick, I'm really asking you, where is your passion? What is it that drives you? What is it that motivates you? What is it that causes you to spring out of bed in the morning with a smile on your lips and an attitude of go get 'em? Where is that? What is that? What's that for you? I've looked at this question of passion. It's been a tough one for me to get my hands around. I know it when I feel it, right? I mean, we know it when we feel it. But what is it that defines passion for us? I would dare say that each and every one of us in this room has a different understanding, a different connection with that word passion. But as we talk about loving God with all your heart and loving your neighbors as yourself, we're talking about loving all of creation. And passion is a way for us to express that. Passion is also a way for us to get distracted. We can say that the individual, okay, all right, make sure that I'm plugged in. I will quit playing with my microphone transmitter. All right. So, for those of you who weren't here last week, I unplugged my microphone, and I don't know. Jim, did you see how long it was that I was just laboring into the video with no sound? Well, so loving God with all your heart, loving your neighbors as yourself, loving the things that you do, loving the activity that you're involved in, loving the way you're being, loving what you are engaged in, both in relationships and activities. How do we look at that, and how do we discover that? Am I Okay, turn this on. No? Yeah? Oh, there we go. Okay. So, here's an offering of a test of whether we're living our passions. One thing would be, I'm excited about my life and turned on by the things I do each day. Rarely, sometimes, most of the time, all the time. So you can take this test yourself. Others comment on how happy I am and what fun it is to be around me. Never, all the time, or somewhere in between. I get upset and thrown off track when unexpected circumstances or situations arise. I'm very clear about the top 5 passions in my life. Not at all crystal clear, somewhat in between, somewhere in between. I make decisions based on what will help me live my passions most fully. I spend my days doing things I love, surrounded by people I love. Life is confusing for me. I don't have a clear sense of direction in my life. No sense, a very clear sense of direction. Or somewhere in between. Isn't that great? The technology of just being able to take a picture. Yeah, that's right. So, are we living our passion? Are we excited about getting up in the morning? Are we looking forward to this new engagement, this new activity, this relationship in which we're involved, all of the relationships that we're involved in? Is this something that drives us, that causes our engines to start, that puts fire in our belly? If we have the opportunity to live our passions, what we're doing is we are having a fulfilling life, a full life, a life that is engaged in this love God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself. Or our passions could be misdirected, such as the shooter's passions in New Zealand. But what's the difference? What's the line between the passions that drive us and propel us into the wonderful things of life and the passions that drive us into the traps of life? Perhaps it is about whether or not our passions are constructive or destructive. Whether our passions lead us to a greater sense of oneness and connection with all that is all, or a passions that drive us to the point of separation and seeing things that are always apart from us, always against us, always are in conflict with us or with our desires. The passion that drives us to realizing the connection, we could call those virtuous passions. And the passions that drive us to destruction, to destroying, to disconnection, to separating ourselves from each other and from God, we could call those sinful. And those are sinful in the traditional sense of the word. In the original sense of the word, not the traditional sense of the word. The original sense of the word being that sin arises from a Greek term, a Greek archer's term that means missing the mark. And what is missing the mark about separation? What's missing the mark is that separation is really an illusion. It is a manufactured condition. It is a choice that we make based on fear to push that away, to find ourselves in a defensive position because we think that everything out there is there to destroy us. And that carried to the nth degree by people such as the shooter in New Zealand, such as the shooter in the temple in, was it Pittsburgh? I think it was Pittsburgh. All of the conditions of the mass murders that have occurred have been based upon shooters having the idea that someone out there is out to get them and they'd better get the others before the others get them. And so it is that many of us fall into that position of seeing things out there as being against us. They're not against us. They're not against us. Shall I say it again? They're not against us. Those things out there are just part of another expression of God. Whether we look upon those expressions as being destructive or not, they are nonetheless an expression of God. Distorted perhaps, misdirected perhaps, but they are nonetheless an expression of God because there is no other but God. This whole thing, this whole creation, even beyond the creation itself, is part of God. And I'm not talking about some anthropomorphic vision of a long-haired fellow, bearded fellow, sitting up there assessing whether or not we are good or bad. But rather I'm talking about consciousness itself. And we are each and every one of us an expression of that divine consciousness. And we each interpret our condition in a unique way. Whether or not we let fear engage us and drive us, or we allow love to engage us and drive us, our life will either take the course of hell or heaven, depending upon whether we allow fear to drive us or we allow love to drive us. And our opportunity is to engage in unconditional love, drive towards that embrace of all that is all, and to allow fear to be dissolved, because love and fear cannot coexist. Fear being a choice that we have made to substantiate our feeling that we are separate and apart from God, which is an illusion. It is false. It is a lie that we have told ourselves. So let go of the lie. Let's let go of the deception. Let's let go of the understanding, or lack of understanding, I should say, the lack of understanding that leads us to see each and every person as apart from us, and God sitting up there is evaluating us, and we're fearful of what that evaluation is. That in and of itself is a drive by that aspect of consciousness which insists upon separation from each other and from God. It is an aspect of the ego itself. Now, I'll say this again. The ego is not bad. The ego is a tool that we have been given to bring us into a greater understanding of our relationship with God. Because when the ego is active and controlling our lives, what happens is that we are in pain. That's the source of our pain. That's the source of all of our pain, is our thinking that we are separate and apart from each other and from God. And at the same time, we have the opportunity to see those situations, such as the situation in New Zealand, and we embrace that situation with unconditional love, not because we think that what the shooter did was right, but rather because we think that what the shooter did was based upon fear, and our embracing that condition and that situation in unconditional love will dissolve that fear. Whether or not the shooter comes to that realization is another question. But in the meantime, we are living our lives from the perspective of connection and inclusion. And that position of connection and inclusion is going to be a fulfilling experience for us, and it is a choice that we have made. It is a miracle that allows us to transform. And for those of you who have taken the Course in Miracles, you hear what I'm talking about. It allows us to transform that fear into an experience of love because we have chosen to be. Not because someone has dictated to us, not because God has said, you will love or I'll smite you. You know, that's really a traditional interpretation of God, isn't it? You will love me or I will smite you. What does that do? That instills fear. Oh my God. Ooh, did I say it incorrectly? We have a choice. And that choice is to love God with all our hearts and love our neighbors as ourselves or not. But if we choose to engage a passionate life, there are several things that we can do to engage that. Number one, there we go. Oh. Okay. Articulating your passion is the first step towards living your passion. If you don't know what your passions are, it is impossible to live them. You may happen upon them here and there. You may have this, oh, wow, that was a great experience. And then you go on to your day-to-day, and then you come across another situation, oh, that was great. And so your life becomes these peaks of passionate experience filled in by a life of, boy, do I have to do this again? This is tough. This is boring. This is hard to get along. Articulate your position. What do you like being? How do you like being? What do you like doing? What is it that is that you'd like to have? Not just material things, but in consciousness. What would you like to have in consciousness that would drive you, cause you to spark up in the morning? Make that list. That list might be 10 items long, it might be 30 items long, it might be 50 items long. I don't know. Each person's going to have a different list. But make sure that that list is a list that is not limited by practical aspect. Oh, I don't have enough money to do that, or I don't have time, or I don't have training, or I don't have anyone to do that with. Don't limit your list based upon practicality, but rather allow your list to be just a blossom of the things that you would love to be, to do, to have. Begin each list with a verb. The process of living is a process. I mean, that's kind of a self-defining phrase, but life is a process, and a process is described by an active verb. Allow an active verb to be the beginning of your item. Or allow your item to be an affirmation. That's even more powerful. To be an affirmation so that you are articulating in each item on your list a way of envisioning your fulfillment of that. That affirmation would be something like, a verb would be becoming a creative writer. That would be the verb's form of an item. An affirmation form of that item would be, I am a creative writer now. It is putting into place the vision of what you are going to be living as if you are living it now. Allow that list to be winnowed down to the top 5, top 4, top 6, whatever you choose. But allow it to be limited, winnowing out all of those things that, I'll do that when I get around to it, but these are the top 5. And the reason for that is that it's very difficult to concentrate on more than 5 things at once. Remember that you can always add to the list, you can change the list, you can delete from the list. I mean, this is an organic, dynamic list. Allow yourself to focus on 5 or so of those items. And then, as you go about your day, as you go about your week, are you engaged in those things that are contributing to or distracting from the achievement of your passions, the living of your passions? Allow yourself to work this. If you want, pair up with someone and have a passion coach. Someone who is just like you, they're going through the process, but they are there to help you be accountable to yourself. Sharing with the person what you would like to, what your passion list is. Have them share with you what their passion list is. And from time to time, say once a week, get together and just talk about it. And that could be by phone. Just talk about what your passion list is and what you've done this week to move towards it. And allow your relationship with your passion coach to be one of mutual encouragement, of mutual affirmation. Just the act of making the list will set you towards the process of fulfilling that list. Engaging with someone to work with you as you work with them. We're talking about peer-to-peer coaching here, okay? Allowing your engagement or your relationship with the coach to be a way of affirming that, yes, indeed, I am investing the effort towards living my passion. And that affirmative act in and of itself is powerful. It's an engaging process. And it's one that allows you to move to a life that is passionate, constructive, allows you to blossom into the divine being that you already are, but have not yet realized. This is a process. Life is a wonderful opportunity for us to explore our relationship with God. And this process of living our passions is a way to demonstrate to yourself and to everyone around you that you are the expression of God in this moment, fulfilling your passions, addressing those things that will bring you that sense of wow. We'll have our meditation. As we come into our meditation, let us come in with I cast all my cares. As we settle into this moment, unencumbered by the cares that we brought to the moment, because we have set those cares aside. We've allowed this moment to be free of fear, free of anxiety, free of frustration, free of rage. We've allowed this moment to be a pristine canvas upon which the moment of this life will be lived in love. Allowing love to move through us. I envision that love, that unconditional love coming from the heart of God, but it is from that universal divine consciousness moving through us into this moment of our lives. We allow that love to pass unencumbered, without restriction, without allocation, filling our being, transforming the dark corners of our personal consciousness into an expression, an awareness, a beingness of God's love. Allow that love to fill you, to press into all of those dark corners, to dissolve the fears that you have in this moment, allowing that love to be transformative. And as we allow that love to spill from us into this moment, allowing that love to touch each and every aspect of this moment, each and every person in this moment, each and every circumstance of this moment. Seeing that love move throughout this room, touching each and every one throughout this city, touching each and every one throughout this country, touching each and every one. Knowing no national borders, it spills across the planet, embracing each and every aspect of this planet with unconditional love. We hold all of those who are suffering from pain. We hold them in consciousness, not separately, but as a collective. And we see this love transforming each and every one. And as we're doing this, as we're realizing this, notice your own experience of realizing unconditional love because you have chosen to express it. And when you compare that experience to the experience that you have in other times of fear, anxiety, frustration, anger, feel how that feels and decide which is the more fulfilling experience, which is the more wonderful experience. And also realize that this choice is completely independent of circumstances. It's independent of relationships. It is independent of anything outside of yourself. It is based upon your sole choice to be that conduit of unconditional love. So why do we choose to do it differently? Breathing in and breathing out and feeling this choice being solely and completely ours. It is our power. It is our ultimate power to choose to be the expression of unconditional love in this moment. And in that expression, our passions have full free reign. And for this we give thanks. And as we come back into this time and space, let us come back sharing the words of Alleluia.